And this is recorded, so if you miss anything or want to watch it again, you can see it. We'll post it on YouTube and send out the link. So we're going to start with solving equations. When you're solving equations, this one is called a two-step equation. And one of the main parts of solving equations is to be able to do opposite operations. We need to know what the opposites are in order to work with this. So there's two main pairs of opposites. The first one is knowing the opposite of addition. So opposite of addition, I would like to ask you guys, what is that? You can either type a chat message to me, you don't have to speak, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can answer verbally. So what's the opposite of addition? So if you do want to answer verbally, you do have to unmute yourself.
Subtraction.
Good, subtraction. Very good. What about multiplication? That's our next pair of opposites. What's the opposite of multiplication?
Division.
Very good. So these are the two main pairs of opposites we need. As you get to more advanced questions, there are some other kinds of opposites, but for almost every equation question, these are what we need. So when we do our opposite operations, we're looking at the two sides of the equation. It's split into a left side and a right side. Sometimes the variable's on the left, sometimes the variable's on the right, sometimes it's on both sides. And our goal is to get all the numbers on one side away from the x. So looking at this x, we want to do the opposite to get these numbers away. So this -5, we need to do our opposite, which we said is addition. When we do that opposite, we put it on both sides, but by doing the opposite, it just cancels this -5 out. Our goal was to get rid of it, and that cancels because really this is 0. We made this just become a 0, which really gets rid of it. And then the other side is where we actually do the math work. We do that addition. 13 plus 5 is 18. So anything we haven't worked with yet comes down. It's still part of our equation. So this one can be a tricky opposite to identify because it doesn't show you what math process is going on here. Anytime you have any number next to any letter, doesn't matter what the number and letter are, doesn't matter if there's multiple letters, anytime your number's next to your letter, you are assuming that it's multiplication going on. And we don't even need to write that in, but we need to know that this is 3 times x because we needed to know the opposite, which we said was division. So this time we divide because the opposite of multiplication is division. Over here again, it cancels. 3 over 3 becomes a 1. When you have a 1 next to an x, you don't really have to write the 1 in. So we just write the letter x. We can just get rid of it. Even though technically it becomes a 1, we just know it cancels out. And then again, the actual math work happens on the other side. 18 divided by 3 gives you 6. And once you have the 1 letter on one side, the 1 number on the other side, that's your final answer. We're done with the question if it says to solve. So any questions? Oh, sorry, Ashley, I did not see that question until just now. Sometimes I forget to look back and forth to the chat. So if you chat a question, give me a second and I'll get to it eventually. So that's our final answer. Any questions so far about the equation process? Anything you want to know more about or you're confused on?
No.
Okay, so.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So what if the x is in the middle?
Okay, So like, what if it had said -5 plus 3x equals 13?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your question. So the process is actually exactly the same. We still would do the opposite of 5 first. You always do the number not actually touching x first, and we'd still add it over to the 13. It would still cancel out, and it would still add up to 18, and you'd still bring down the 3x, and then we'd still divide as the last step. I will say one thing that can be confusing. So it's easy to see the -5, the opposite is +5. Let's change this up a little bit. So I'm getting to the far right of the screen here now. Even if that 3x is still in the middle, if there's a +5 on the left, we assume that this is positive if they don't write the negative sign. So because we know this is a +5, this time our opposite would be to minus. So does that make sense? Do you feel more comfortable
Yes.
with that? Okay, good. And then this answer, since I changed it up, it didn't come out nicely. 8 divided by 3 is 2.6. So the answer might be a decimal, or they might have even just left it as the fraction 8/3. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and re-mute you just because there's a lot of background noise. Next time you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself again. Okay. So what can change this up? These are called equations with variables on both sides. When there's a variable on the left side and on the right side. We have the 5x on the left, the 7x on the right. This time we need to move the x's to be together. Right now they're on opposite sides. We can't solve it like that. So we saw at the end of the last problem when you had the 3x, our opposite was to divide, but that only moved the 3. I'm going to go back to the page just to show you one more time. When we divided by 3, it left the x there. So when there's x's on both sides, we want to move the x and the number with it. So our opposite in this case is going to be either addition or subtraction, depending on the sign that's going on. Since this 7x is currently positive, our opposite now will be to subtract the 7x from both sides. Again, the purpose of the opposite is just to cancel it out and get rid of it. Now we have no more x's on the right side. We just bring it down. Over here, we actually combine them. So why did I put the 7x under the 5 instead of the 8? What do you guys think? Why did I put it under the 5 instead of the 8?
Like integers.
So we
Good.
got an X.
Because it has an x. These are like terms. You have to line it up with its same letter or else they will not combine together. Very good. So now we just have a similar equation to what we did before. Now it's just our two-step equation. What opposite should we do next?
Subtract 8 from both sides.
Good. So some people prefer not to write it on both sides. They feel like it gets really messy and confusing. Just to show you an option, we really only care about the -8 under the -14. That's where the math happens. So you can just cross it out, say that's the one I'm doing the opposite of, if you don't like writing it on both sides. Totally up to you, whatever you prefer for when you write out your work. So when we do -14 minus 8, feel free to use a calculator. Calculators are great. I'm all about calculators. But if you don't have a calculator and you forgot, well, what do I do if there's two minus signs? You can draw out a little number line. We're starting at -14 and we're moving left 8 spaces. So you could either count 8 spaces, or you can see it's actually going to make a bigger number. 14 plus 8 is the 22, but we keep it a negative. So last step, what do we do with that -2?
Divide it on both sides.
Good. Some people like to add it. They forget that this is actually multiplication. So just remember, number next to a letter, multiplication is going on, so our opposite is to divide. And the rule is a negative divided by a negative is a positive number. Any questions about that process so far?
So it's always from right to left, right?
I try to keep it the same. I like always doing it from right to left if I can. One situation where you would have to go left to right, let me change this up again a little bit. So the problem with this one is if you go from right to left, you end up with nothing on this other side. So technically you could write it as 0, but a lot of people forget that. So usually with one like this, where the right only has a variable and there's no extra number, this is one of the few cases where I go left to right. Almost always you can go right to left, but very, very occasionally you have to go left to right. Good. Any other questions about this problem? Okay. So I have one more equation. Maybe we'll get to it eventually, but let's go ahead and open it up to any questions you have if there are a certain section or problem you've been trying to work on and don't understand.
Just the second half, I don't get any of it.
Of the equations that we just talked about?
Oh, no, I thought you meant like of the whole lesson, like the whole like semester of this class or whatever.
Okay, the problem is I don't know what class you're in. We have a lot of people of a lot of variety, so what class are you in?
You know what, I don't even remember what it's called, but I'm talking about like the slope-intercept forms.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know, anything to do with like those graphs and the y2 minus, I don't really know what I'm missing. I just don't get it.
Okay. So let's focus on slope. Again, we have a lot of variety of people. You may or may not need this specifically for your class now, but it's good review because it's usually used in topics you might be doing, even if it's not exactly the topic you're doing. So slope-intercept form has to do with lines on a graph. So let me get a line up on our screen. Okay. So if we have this line and we need to find the slope of the line. When we find slope, we use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And you'll often see the letter m. M is used to represent slope. So when you're working with slope, you're basically trying to find out how much does this line tilt. You know, this one's kind of a general tilt. Maybe you get a steeper tilt, or you could have a shallower tilt. So this number is going to tell you how much is this line tilted. So we need actual coordinates to do this. You might see a graph you might see a table. A table will just have a list of points. Or they might actually list the coordinates for you. All three of these would be solved the same way if it asks you to find the slope. On the graph, to identify the coordinate, if it's not labeled already, we have to count from the center. If you count from the origin, you have to go right 2 spaces. The starting space does not count as a movement. That's 0. So we count 1 space right, 2 spaces right. That's the x coordinate, 2, and then we go up 1, so 2, 1. In the other direction, the other point, we're going left 3 spaces and down 1 space, so -3, -1. If they write it as a table, the coordinates are just the x and y that's listed together. And then if they write it as points, you already have the coordinates. So when you have 2 coordinates, these are all x and y values. So the reason we have these 2s and these 1s is they're just telling you what point. We have the first point, we have the second point. So x1, y1, x2, y2. That's just saying x value of the first point, y value of the first point, x value of the second point, y value of the second point. So now we actually plug those numbers into the slope formula. So it says to start with y2. What actual number do we use for y2?
-1.
Good, -1. That was the y value of the second point. So how about y1?
1.
1. So -1 minus 1. Then we go on to the x values and we do the same thing. X value of the second point minus x value of the first point. We just had someone else join, so just to make sure they're caught up, we're talking about how to find the slope of a line using the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we've plugged in our y values and our x values, and now we just need to simplify. When you have this kind of fraction format, we do everything on top first, combine it together, everything on bottom second, combine it together. So -1 minus 1 is -2, and -3 minus 2 is -5. So this might be our final answer. We may have to reduce it though. Number-wise, this doesn't actually reduce as a fraction, but sign-wise, a negative sign over a negative sign changes to just a plus sign. Because when you actually do division, if you had -6 divided by -3, it comes out as +3. So even if you can't do the full division, we can't do 2 divided by 5 without getting a decimal, we still change it to positive. So any questions on this concept of slope? Okay. So after you find the slope, the actual equation for the line can be found. So there's one assignment where it's just find the slope, you'd stop here. You can find the entire equation as well using slope-intercept form, or you can graph a line from slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where m stands for the slope and b stands for the y-intercept. So if I were to give you this equation, What's the slope using that equation?
The fraction,
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
the negative 1/2.
Good. The negative 1/2, the number in front of x, that's our slope. So there's only one number left to be our y-intercept. Knowing this information, we can graph a line. Sorry, it always takes a little bit to draw a graph out. So we start with the y-intercept. We kind of want to start with slope because we read left to right, so we want everything on the left to be the first thing we do. But we actually start with the y-intercept. On our coordinate grid, x and y, the y-intercept goes on the y-axis at the number we found, +3. On the y-axis is our y-intercept. That's our first point. Then we use the slope to graph our second point. The slope of -1/2 tells you to go down 1 space and right 2. We're used to counting from the center, but slope is always counted from the y-intercept. Down 1 space, right 1, 2 spaces. And there's our second point, and then you can connect that with a line. So you do have a second option. Like I said, I love calculators, I love technology. There's a website called desmos.com. That's a great online graphing calculator that you guys are welcome to use. So if you hit start graphing, it'll come up with a coordinate plane, and in box 1, you would type your equation. Y equals -1 divided by 2. Now it'll keep you on the bottom of the fraction unless you click to the right, x plus 3. And it gives you the same picture that we drew by hand. It might look slightly different. You know, my graph is probably not as accurate as this one because I'm graphing it by hand, but it'll look almost exactly the same. So anyone else have questions about topics they are having trouble with?
I have having problem with my fractions. Like one of the problems that I had was x/5 equals -2.
Okay. So in this case where you want to solve this equation, this is actually less about the fraction and more about those opposite operations. A fraction bar is really just telling you to divide. This is x divided by 5. So we already talked about the opposite of divide. What do we need to do? What's the opposite of dividing by 5?
Multiply.
Multiply. So this one specifically is one where I really like to only write it on the other side. I like writing the multiply 5 over here and knowing this cancels out. And then that's actually the end of the problem. We did the opposite operation to cancel that, and we did the multiplication to get the -10. Does that make sense?
I understand it. Yes.
Good. Anyone else? What's a
How did
topic?
you get -10? Because the 2 is negative already?
Yes, good question. So -2 times 5. 2 times 5 itself gave you the 10. And then when you have a negative times a positive number, then it comes out negative. The rules for multiplication and division, 2 signs that are the same. So if you have positive times positive, comes out positive. Or negative times negative, comes out negative. So these were the same signs that we started with. Sorry, I said the wrong thing. I'm going to start that sentence again. Two signs that are the same, positive times positive comes out positive, negative times negative comes out positive. I said the wrong sign before. So if you start with the same signs, it always comes out positive. If you start with different signs, you have one negative, one positive, it always comes out negative. But that is only the rule for multiplication. The rules for addition and subtraction, those are different. I guess the rules for division are the same though. Dividing two different signs comes out negative. Dividing two of the same sign comes out positive. And if you're ever unsure, plug it into a calculator. So we're going to take a little break from our free response questions because I do want to also show you how to use the online tutor. You're always welcome to send me chat messages or emails. You can use your contact. Let me pull up my student account so you can see. So in the need help area, you should be able to click on the class and get to me. There's the email or the chat button, and you should, I don't know why it's not popping up. Let me try the email button. I'm going to try refreshing the page. If it ever doesn't work, then would be time to call tech support, because tech support could help you fix it. Okay, you could also go to messages. Let me try this one more time. Maybe it's because this is kind of a fake student account that it's not working. You should be able to click on this and click on chat and send me a message. But say you need help and I'm not online, you know, sometimes I'm busy. So there's also this tutor.com button down here. This will not take you to me. This will take you to a random online math tutor. But they can help you with any question you might have. If you're like, I need to solve this equation. Apparently none of my buttons are working today. So I'm just going to go to tutor.com manually. The button should work for you. If not, tech support is a good option. I'll write their number down on the whiteboard in a minute. So it will not take you to this screen. I don't know why it's not. Sorry, I tried this earlier and it did work. I'm not sure why I'm having so many technical difficulties. There we go. Tutor.com button worked. So it'll take you to this screen. It'll already have the topic of math selected. If you were working in your math class, you can actually ask for any of your classes. And then you select your subject, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or whatever class you're in. It doesn't matter what grade you select. Any high school grade's fine, doesn't matter. And then you can actually type your question in. Let's say we had that x divided by 5 equals -2 question. You can type that question in and connect now, and it's going to take you to a tutor. If it's a more complicated question and you don't know how to type it in, if you can take a screenshot, you can attach an actual file. You can click attach file and choose wherever you saved it. I don't have a file, so I don't need to save it. So when you hit connect now, it will have a little bar where it thinks for a minute. If you change your mind, you figured it out, you can hit cancel request. Sorry, it is kind of a slow process. So these tutors, they won't know any of the requirements of the program. They won't know how many math classes you need to take or when assignments are due. but they can help you actually answer a math question. I don't know how to do this math problem. It's not verbal, it's only over chat. So you'll have this chat down here and they'll say, you know, welcome, things like that. You can, oops, you can type back. There's a whiteboard that you can actually write on or they'll write on, and they'll just walk you through the process. So since we don't need to know how to solve this problem, I am going to be a little rude and leave. You can click end session once you're done. They'll ask you questions as you go, but I'm just going to go ahead and exit out. And it'll have a little survey at the end that's not super important. So they can be a big help, especially if you're like, I don't know how to solve this particular problem and I need help right away. You can click that need help button at any time and click that online tutor and they'll answer you immediately. Any questions about how to use that online tutor?
So our program, we are state funded, so there's no cost to you or him. It is free.
Okay. Let's just go back to general questions then. I guess we're gonna have a little extra time for general questions. So any other specific topics you guys are having trouble with?
In certain certain areas, there's multiple answers. Does it matter which answer you give?
Do you have a specific question?
So that's great. And the reason I asked,
As far as what I'm working on, there was it's basically algebra 1. It's where basically you can give a answer with a decimal or a fraction, that kind of thing, basically reducing to the lowest.
Okay, sorry, now I understand. If it's something like you're typing in instead of selecting, either I will usually tell you or it's something I actually grade. I will see it, and if it didn't give you instructions, if it didn't say round to the nearest 10th, then I will take whatever format you write it in, as long as it's reduced. So let me get to a blank page. So let's say your answer is 3/6. This I would give you partial points for. I'd usually do like half a point or 3/4 of a point, but every fraction, your final answer should be the reduced fraction. So to reduce this, we need to decide on one number that divides into the top and into the bottom. What's one number that divides into 3 and into 6?
1.
That is true. We need the biggest number. We need something other than 1.
3.
3. If we divide by 1, we're just still at the same place. We're still at 3/6. So 1's kind of a special case. So then we do the division. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. Double check, see if it could reduce again. Sometimes you don't pick the very, very biggest number. So if we did 1/2, the only thing literally that works this time is 1. That's it. And we don't care if it's a 1 for the reducing. So we are done at 1/2. So I would accept 1/2, which when you're typing, you can just do 1/2. Or if you really wanted to, you could write it out 1/2, like you could type it in words. I'm usually pretty flexible as long as I know you know the correct answer. That would be acceptable because it's reduced. Or if I didn't specify again, you could write it as 0.5. That's also correct. Does that answer your question on that?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Sorry, sometimes I might go a little too thorough. I want to make sure I'm covering everything you might be wondering about. Okay, anyone else? What other questions do you guys have?
You have a question on page 3.
Okay. Page 3 of these.
Yes.
Okay. So how do we do an equation like this?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds like we had another person join. Thanks for joining. We're currently covering this question. You came at the beginning, and we're going to learn how to solve this. So we're solving this equation, but there's a lot going on here. We still have our left side. We still have our right side. But now we have parentheses, extra numbers. So we always want to address the parentheses first and do distribution. Want to distribute. So when you have a number touching a set of parentheses, to distribute means to multiply it in, and it actually gets used 2 times. We're going to do 3 times x and also 3 times the 5. So I usually think of it as 3 times -5, whatever the sign is of that current number. And then whatever sign we get out will still be in between. So 3 times x, there's no actual multiplication to do there. It's just 3x. 3 times -5 is a -15. The 3 times 5 gives us the 15. A positive times a negative gives us the negative. So then the +2 is not part of distribution. It's not in the parentheses. We just bring it down. So if we distribute out the 2 on the next parenthesis, what are we going to get once we distribute the 2 in?
So would it be two times 2?
Yep, 2 times 2. Which is a 4. And then we still have one more step.
It would be plus 10 times 2.
Yep. Positive 10 times the positive 2 gives us plus 20. Good. So we distributed, we've taken care of that first step. Now we want to combine any like terms on the same side. We're not doing opposites yet. Opposites where we decide I'm going to add this over or minus this over. We're just going to combine like terms. So on the left side, do we have any like terms over here?
No.
No.
Okay. So like terms are not just when there's letters. If there was another letter, you know, I think you guys would have known for sure there's like terms. 2 numbers without a letter, those are actually also considered to be like terms. It's kind of a tricky thing that we hadn't talked about yet. So -15 plus 2, we can combine those together. They're considered like terms because they don't have letters. Does that make sense why they're like terms?
Yes.
Okay. So -15 plus 2 comes out to be -13. And here's a good chance to talk about our rules of addition and subtraction. When you have 2 numbers with different signs that you're adding, it's like you actually do subtraction. 15 minus 2 is 13. But you keep the sign of the bigger number. Since the 15 is negative, that means the final answer, 13, is negative. Or you can plug it into a calculator.
So it's just like when a negative and a positive, it equals a negative, correct?
Not all the time. Let me make one small change. If you did -2 plus 15, we still get a 13, but it comes out positive. So the rules for adding and subtracting are different than the multiplication and division rules. This one you decide the sign based off the bigger number. This was bigger, So our answer was negative. This one, the 15 was bigger, but it was positive, so our answer was positive.
Got it.
Good. And it's a lot of rules to remember. It's kind of weird because you have to remember different rules for addition and subtraction, different rules for multiplication and division. So on the right side, are there any like terms to combine on the right side?
Yes.
Which ones are like terms?
The last school that you attended, was that the cyber school?
The
4
4.
times plus 20.
But that is not a times symbol, that's the letter X. So the letter
Okay.
X makes it not a like term to the 20. In almost all math problems now, this will not be the times symbol. The multiply sign will be this little dot I've been using. So you do have to watch out for that because we're so used to the X being the multiplication symbol.
Okay, that was my fault. I should have thought about that. So that's considered a letter.
Yes, that is considered the letter X and not the multiplication symbol.
So
And
it's not like then, because it's not a letter on the other side of the 20.
correct. Good.
Okay.
And never apologize. I'm super happy you guys participate. And if you have a question that I need to say, well, actually it goes like this, probably other people have some of those same misconceptions. So I'm glad it comes up because then we can make sure that everyone has, we're all on the same page. So once we have it to this point, we've combined like terms. Now it's actually this same process. And I didn't write this out step by step, but I'm going to write the steps this time. We move the X on the right to the left. And we talked about how it's almost all the time. X term on right to the left.
Yeah, so for the program, you need to have
So our X term on the right is the 4X. How am I going to move it to the other side? What opposite moves it?
What was the question again?
How are we going to move the 4X over to be with the 3X?
You distribute it, right?
Distribute was when we had parentheses,
Okay.
which we've gotten rid of. I'm going to go back a page to show you this problem again. How did we move this 7X over to be with the 5?
One right, left.
We went right, left, but did we add it over? Did we minus it over? Multiply, divide?
Oh, you would subtract
You
it.
add it. You add it.
Okay, so now we have two different responses, add or subtract. So we,
Subtract, right?
okay, we always base it off the sign it currently is. This 4 is currently positive, and we want to do the opposite. So subtraction is the correct step in this case, because it's the opposite of addition. So 3 minus 4. Again, we have different signs, positive 3, negative 4. That means you actually subtract the numbers. 4 minus 3 gives you a 1, but the 4 was bigger, so we keep it a negative 1, or plug it into a calculator. If you don't have a handheld calculator, there's plenty of apps, or I always just go to Google Calculator. Oops, sorry, it was 3 minus 4, and just type it in. So everything else we bring down. So now we're only doing opposites. What opposite should we do next?
Add.
Add the 13 specifically. Opposite of subtracting 13 is to add. I'm running out of room, so I've got to make it so I can scroll really quick. So negative 1x just comes down again. 33. And then one final step. What's our last opposite?
Do we have to divide the -1 by +1?
Close. Divide by -1. So that's actually another common thing. Since we change the sign when we do the opposite of addition and subtraction, then we almost always want to change the sign. When you're multiplying and dividing, you do not change the sign. The opposite isn't changing the sign. The opposite is actually doing the division. So since we did the opposite of division, just divide the -1 itself. And once you have x by itself, that's our final answer. Any other questions about this problem?
No.
So, do you guys want to do another equation type problem, or did you think of any other problems you might be wondering about for other parts of your class?
Actually, I do. When it comes to knowing like what a the whole number and the irrational number and the rational number, actually, understanding that is a little bit hard for me as far as labeling goes.
Okay. So, usually it'll be a question like, what category? I can't remember the exact wording. Maybe I think I said number group. What number group does -5 belong to? Or groups. It can belong to more than one. So, what are the number groups? There's a lot of different categories that have a lot of different properties, and they might be useful in a lot of different situations. So, for an example, a real life situation is if you wanted to buy some screws. You can't have half a screw. That's no good to you. They only sell you one screw at a time. So that's called the natural numbers. And it's also the numbers you usually start when you're teaching children to count. So you start at 1 and just count up. Every number bigger than 1, that's no decimals, no pieces of numbers, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting up. Whole numbers add one more number to that group. Whole numbers are the group of numbers where you include 0. Then you could consider the option of buying no screws at all. So if we wanted to know what number group +3 belongs to, so far we have natural and whole. It belongs to multiple groups. Integers come next. Integers include now the negative whole numbers. Still no pieces of numbers, still no decimals. And you could also think of it as positive numbers. Natural numbers are positives. Whole numbers are 0 and positives. And integers are -0 and positive. We also have rational. And it again uses all the groups above. Technically, a rational is any number that can be written as a fraction, and all whole numbers could. We could write the number 2 as 2/1, so technically it's a fraction. But usually I just write all the groups out. So rational is still the negatives, still 0, still the positives. It also includes any fraction. A decimal that stops. Stops. Or a decimal that repeats. Decimal. Repeats. So for example, a decimal stops, that would be 0.5. It only has one number after the decimal point. A decimal that repeats would be like, and I'm going to go to the calculator really quick. If you do 2 divided by 3, that gives you this just 0.666. The calculator has to stop. It can't write this out forever. But technically, these 6s are literally going forever. This is just 6 forever. So that's an example of a decimal that repeats. And you can write a little bar over it to show that it repeats, so you don't have to just write a whole bunch of 6s. So the last category is irrational numbers. And those come from square roots. They are decimals that don't repeat. Sorry, in order to answer this one question, there's a lot of explanation and definitions because we need to know all the groups. So for example, square root of 50, again, you can plug that into a calculator. The square root symbol usually looks like some version of a check mark. This has a decimal. Again, technically, this number goes forever. There's more digits we can't see, but there's no pattern. It's just a random 0716. There's no pattern to it. So square root of 50 would be irrational. You do have to watch out. Not all square roots are irrational. Always plug them into a calculator. Square root of 25, that comes out as exactly 5. So now that we know all the groups, let's answer what category does this belong to? So -5, it's in the integer category. It's in these negative numbers, but it's also in the rational category. It fits in 2 places. So it's an integer and rational.
Ms. Barton, can you is there any way you can like link those notes that you just wrote out like that to the
Yes,
class?
I can. I don't know exactly the space where we're going to put them. This is actually still kind of a new process.
Okay.
But if every one of you wants the notes, types your email address, then I'll make sure that they get to you for sure, and we'll also let you know where they're going to be in general.
Okay, thank you.
So let's practice another problem with this because it can be kind of confusing. We had to do a lot of explanation. I want it to be on the same page though, so I'm going to write it up over here. If I said the number 52, what groups would that belong to?
Natural, whole,
Natural and whole. Any others? Those are.
Integers.
It also fits in integers. 52 is a positive number, and positives are also in the integers.
Rational as well.
Rational as well. Good. So let's try one more. What about -0.127?
Integers.
So integers don't include the actual decimals. Integers are not any negative number, they're negative whole numbers only. -5's an integer, but -5.1, not an integer. So that's why I picked this one, because I thought that might be something confusing.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at rational. Is it a rational number?
Yep, rational is the only category it fits into. Sometimes a number will fit into lots of categories, and sometimes it will only fit into one. So any other questions on this topic?
No, not from me.
Anyone else?
Answered them all, I believe.
Okay, perfect. We're about out of time. Is there any quick questions? Try and fit a little one more topic in. Or even just any questions about how the course works, when stuff's due, questions about the final.
Oh, the final. So with the study guide, because I've already printed it out,
Mhm.
everything on that study guide will be what we will cover in the final.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
When is the next, I guess, meeting like this?
So there is, the next math one is not for 2 weeks. There's, I believe, a English one tomorrow at 2 p.m. Utah time. Again, everyone's in a different state. If you're Ohio, that's 4. If you're Washington, that's 1. The next math one is not until June 18th at 1:30 Utah time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I did get one email. Does anyone else want the notes? You can send me a chat message with your email and I will make sure to get them sent to you. And if you are fine and wrote stuff down, you don't have to send me your email. Oh, and I did talk about tech support earlier. Anytime you have a computer issue, the class isn't working, you can't click on something, the main office number is 855-945-5472. And you can contact tech support there. You can call into your academic coach there if you have any questions. Okay, thanks guys for joining me today. Anytime you have a question, feel free to send chat message, email. I usually try and get back to you as soon as I can, just depending on what I'm doing at the moment. I hope you guys have a great day.
Yeah. We could text someone like that.